You're watching Philadelphia 76ers Now by Chat Sports. I'm Ja'sean. Appreciate all of you for being here with us. We have a loaded show on the docket for today, taking a look at some realistic and affordable free agent targets for the Sixers here, as well as some trade targets to bulk up this roster. Before we dive into that, though, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We just yesterday surpassed 11,000 subscribers. As a guy who grew up in the Philadelphia area, it's been an incredible honor to grow this channel and host shows here on a near daily basis, especially during the heightened moments of this offseason. Let's continue to grow the Sixers Now empire by hitting that sub button. And if you're looking for entertaining, informative, insightful Sixers coverage year-round, not just during the offseason, we have you covered here. Realistic free agent target number one. It's a guy who the Sixers, I think, are going to bring back in B-ball Paul, out the mud Paul Reed. His growth over the last couple of years has been impressive, and if you go back and watch what he did at the Paul, he was long, he was wiry, he was athletic. Even at the G League level, he was that too, and started to have some signs of growth when he was playing for the G League, Delaware Bluecoats, and putting up a lot of numbers, but the game seemed to move too fast for him in the infancy of his NBA career. But as he's gotten a little bit older and with more playing time, he's become a much more seasoned player. And because the game has slowed down, he's been able to show his tenacity, his aggressiveness, and his overall versatility on both ends of the floor. I thought there was a moment of growth for him against the Celtics in Game 1 when Boston intentionally fouled him. He steps up to the free throw line and hits a couple of big free throws, and as evidenced by the numbers that we just showed you, with more playing time has come a little bit more production. This past year, playing 69 games, he was actually a part of Glenn Rivers' rotation. New rule here on the show, no longer calling Doc Rivers Doc Rivers. He now goes by Glenn Rivers. The only Doc in the history of the Sixers organization now can be referred to as Dr. J. So B-ball Paul last year, 4 points, nearly 4 boards, 11 minutes per game. But I've seen Nick Nurse develop a lot of quality bigs while he's been the coach for the Toronto Raptors. We're talking Precious Achiuwa, Chris Boucher, the list goes on and on and on. He's done a great job of developing players in general. I think Paul Reed could be the beneficiary of that. Realistic free agent target number 2, a player who I'm intrigued by, who already got paid a couple of years ago, didn't necessarily live up to those contractual obligations or expectations in Kelly Oubre Jr., but I think coming in off the bench, he'd be able to give you a little bit of an athletic edge and a scoring punch on that second unit that you currently don't have at that wing spot. You bring in Patrick Beverly, I think he adds much needed toughness to this team that's been an enabling organization since the process. You saw that PJ Tucker was able to bring the best out of a guy like Joel Embiid. Now you bring in Patrick Beverly into the equation. You have 2 back alley dogs, and I think Beverly does help this rotation coming off the pine. Kelly Oubre Jr. last year for a bad Hornets team, 20 points per game, 43% from the field, a paltry 32% from three-point range. Has to improve on that, but because of some of those struggles and the lack of consistency and him being injured last year, I think his value is low. I think he could be in line for about a 1-year contract, a prove-it deal, and because he'd be motivated by that with limited playing time, I think that he could give the Sixers some solid production coming off the bench and some much-needed athleticism at that wing spot, which is what they have really lacked coming off the bench with some of those reserves over the last couple of years because they've been so cash-strapped. So with that, let's ask you this. This will be our pinned comment on today's show, so make sure you get your votes in. Your top remaining realistic free agent target, let me know. Drop a name in the comment section. We always appreciate your feedback. Now to the front court. Let's talk about JaMychal Green here. We talked about Paul Reed in that front court just moments ago. JaMychal Green, I liked the signing for the Golden State Warriors last year, but he ended up not really playing all that much. Now, in the second-round series against the Los Angeles Lakers, Steve Kerr actually started him for a couple of games because the Warriors were desperate for size against the taller and more athletic Los Angeles Lakers. And he had a couple of threes. You look at his tallies from a year ago, 6.5 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, 54% shooting from the field, almost 38% from three-point range. And I've said this a couple of times here on the show. I'm tired of watching the corpse of DeAndre Jordan, Greg Monroe, Dwayne Dedmon backing up Joel Embiid. I think a point of emphasis for this team, considering that Embiid has been injured a lot throughout his career, is being able to fortify the backup center role. And if JaMychal Green can play 10 to 12 minutes, that's better than the 10 to 12 minutes that used to go to guys like DeAndre Jordan. And you look at the Sixers' current lineup right now, if they do run it back, the starting five's fine. You'll win more than 50 games. You have Patrick Beverly. You have DeAnthony Melton. Daniel House showed me something coming in off the bench against that Celtics team. But outside of that, a lot of bench questions, and that's why these players become very, very important and integral to the Sixers' rotation. And with that, that's a perfect segue here to Christian Wood. And Coop, I'll bring you on because you're a big Mavericks fan, and I think it's odd how Christian Wood always has production. He brings you value as a big who can stretch the floor, play make, and knock down some threes, yet you're telling me that you think that he might be a vet min guy after he signed a somewhat lofty contract with the Rockets a couple of years ago. Now, we don't have definitive inside sources that say that he's kind of a cultural cancer. We know he's an awful defensive player, but it seems as though everywhere he goes, people question who he is as a guy and some of these cultural concerns. But you look at the numbers here as you get yourself ready to come on, Coop. 16.5 points per game, 7 rebounds, almost 38% from three for a guy who's damn near 7 feet tall. Why doesn't he have more value on the free agency market? And why could a guy like this go for a vet min deal?
I think it simply has to do with his defense. He just doesn't provide anything on that end, no matter how efficient of a scorer he is. He's just that much worse defensively. I mean, he was a complete black hole there, and it's a reason the Mavericks couldn't start him. They would have loved for him to be their starting five, but Jason Kidd just didn't trust him on that end to get the job done. And as the season went on, his minutes went down, and that's kind of why the Mavericks already said that they're just not going to bring him back in free agency.
Yeah, and Dallas kind of whipped at that 5 spot last offseason. They brought in JaVale McGee, they brought in Christian Wood via the trade, and both of those moves did not work at all, and that's why now they have an overload of centers in that front court. Coming up around the corner, some realistic trade targets that the Sixers could look to bring in. First, though, feel free to interact with me on Twitter and Instagram. It's the same handle on both platforms here, at @Chase_Senior. I've had so many of you over the last couple of weeks who are new to the show. Introduce yourselves. Don't be a stranger. Slide in the DMs. Say what's up. Let's talk some Sixers. Realistic trade targets. Let's start with Royce O'Neale, kind of a wing type of player who can get to the cup on some dribble drives. He can knock down some threes. He's a veteran who does have a lot of playoff experience. He's also consistently available. Last 4 years, games played 76, 77, 71, and 71. Last year playing with the Brooklyn Nets, he's played with the Utah Jazz before. This is the type of bench production that I'm desperate for on a very affordable contract. Like about 9 points per game, 5 rebounds, active, and a guy who can hover around that three-point arc, maybe be a replacement for like a PJ Tucker, but with more offense, shoot around 39% from three-point range. I think he could be had for cheap. The same might be able to be said for Kelly Olynyk. A couple of years ago, against the Washington Wizards while he was playing with the Boston Celtics, right, Smitty? He goes off in that Game 7. He's popping 3 after 3. And I like him as a guy who can back up Embiid because, like, Embiid has never had a backup behind him or a 4 who could play alongside him who can consistently hit three-point shots, provide some floor spacing, and negate some of the double teams that inevitably go Joel Embiid's way. Now, Al Horford was brought in a few years ago, and that was an unmitigated disaster. That's why Daryl Morey had to move off that contract. He did. But I think that Olynyk, stylistically, obviously, a little bit better than Al Horford offensively. Not the same defensive player, but Olynyk as a backup 5 who can knock down some threes, and the offense can kind of run through him from time to time out of the post. 12.5 points per game last year, 6 rebounds, almost 50% from the floor, 39% from three-point range. Give me Kelly Olynyk all day. I love that high-leverage playoff experience as well. JaSean Tate, Houston Rockets, a player who's kind of fallen out of the rotation a little bit. Interesting career for him. Didn't enter the NBA until he was about 25 years old. But what the Rockets have done over the last couple of off seasons via free agency, via the draft. By the way, insane to be paying Fred VanVleet more than $40 million per year. Dylan Brooks getting $20 million, $80 million total. That's just nuts. But I think they're trying to bring in some rugged players, some culture changers, and that's why they brought in those two aforementioned players. But JaShawn Tate, because of the draft picks that have been brought in, rags to riches story, I would like him as an option who could also be traded for cheap. 9 points per game last year, but the previous 2 seasons hovering around that 11, 12-point threshold, and he doesn't really shoot the three-pointer. He's actually awful, really, and has some fear in taking the three-point shot, but can distribute the basketball a little bit and can get that offense moving, especially on that fast break. JaShawn Tate rounding out the list of affordable trade targets for Philadelphia here, considering they're a little bit tight on cash. So up to this point, summer school. Here we are right after the 4th of July, and the Sixers have made one move in free agency, Patrick Beverly. So with that, grade the Sixers roster right now. A, B, C, D, or F, let me know.